Okay, here's a woman. Here's the woman. Her page is at Daily Debs. Here's her explaining HB1 or H1B, H1B, whatever the fuck. Here's her explaining.
As someone who used to work in IT recruitment, it is so interesting to hear the dialogue that's happening about the H-1B visa program. So if you don't work in tech, you've probably not heard of this visa program before. Essentially, it was developed for highly skilled workers to come into the States and take primarily technical engineering jobs. Could be other kind of positions, but in all the ones I recruited, they were always for IT roles. And when I was first being trained as a recruiter and somebody explained this program to me, I was like, is this indentured servitude? Or are we calling it that? Which is like so wild, because I don't know if you saw Ann Coulter's tweet where she essentially said, yeah, this is a predatory program. It's essentially indentured servitude. Like, she's right, and I agree with her. But this is the typical life cycle that an H-1B candidate often takes. They usually go to college, mostly in India, and they'll get their master's degree in the States. This gives them a student visa where they can work for an employer for 2 to 3 years. So after they graduate, these students usually have two options. One, they can get a job. Really, sir? They can either get a full-time job with a company, but within 2 years, that company has to sponsor their visa. This can usually cost an employer anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000, I think, a year. So unless they find an absolute gem, most companies don't opt to do this. The second is that they can find a vendor management company to sponsor them. And this is where it gets into like super tricky territory. This is typically called a third-party vendor management system. So a technical recruiter like myself would post a job asking for very specific requirements. And I would usually get contacted by a sales representative of this third-party vendor management company saying, I have someone with 7 years of experience in Java and all the full stack qualifications. They would be a corp-to-corp candidate, which means we don't pay the person doing the job, we pay the company that is holding the visa for the candidate. So usually this candidate, once you get them on the phone, because you got to get them on the phone, you got to vet who they are, you got to make sure they can do the job that their resume says they can do. And an H-1B resume is truly wild because they are trained to put every single technology under the sun. They understood ATS matching before anybody else did. But you can't even discuss rate with them directly. You have to discuss rate with their vendor manager. Now, because this is a corp-to-corp situation, they are hired on as contractors for the client. So they can be anywhere from 6 months, 12 months, 18-month, never-ending contract, but they are not a full-time employee with the company. So let's say JP Morgan Chase hires them. Their W-2 will actually say the name of the company that is holding their visa. And one of the biggest requirements to stay on an H-1B visa is continuous employment. So it's also not uncommon to see somebody who works in a different city in the United States every 12 to 18 months. So not only do they have to stay continuously employed, I don't know how long the gap is before they're in danger of being deported, but they have to stay continuously employed. But sometimes that means that they are moving either themselves or their family across the country just to secure a contract position. And the rate difference between what the vendor manager makes per hour and what the consultant makes is insane. For an engineering, a high-skilled engineering role, the bill rate could be anywhere from $100 to $150 an hour. And we pay that to the vendor. But the engineer, the one doing the work, they might get $50 an hour. And can barely negotiate. They can't negotiate for it because the vendor management company is holding their visa process. They are, paying. That difference is helping pay to make sure that they're compliant, making sure that they're hitting certain deadlines. So $50 an hour is not nothing, but it's a huge difference from what that vendor is making. And we haven't even talked about bait and switch vendors. In IT recruitment, you have to make sure that you are vetting these third-party vendor management companies because some of them deal in super shady business practices. They will often have one person, a highly skilled engineer, be the one that does the phone screen, sometimes even does the in-person interview. And then a completely different person shows up for the job. Oftentimes, that person that actually shows up is not nearly as skilled and will find ways to have VPN systems that go back to India where someone else is feeding them the lines of code to do their job. Now, this scheme usually does not last long, but it lasts long enough to get paid enough money where apparently it is worth it. There are entire training courses that we had to take, and sometimes I helped to curate, that warned recruiters how to spot bait and switch candidates. So as we're having this larger, much needed conversation about immigration policies, migrant workforces, who is inherently smarter, who is, we have to pull these people from overseas to take these jobs. I just think it's so fascinating that we are finally kind of talking about this program in a larger level because there are huge problems with this system. It is kind of predatory. It is a great way for someone to work long enough to get their green card and then ultimately become a citizen. I have worked with dozens of engineers that this was their pathway to citizenship, and they were great at their jobs, and they got their bag, and then when they became either a green card holder or a U.S. citizen, they were able to make substantially more money. But that process in the first few years of being an H-1B holder, you are really just not even you can't even be as autonomous with your career decisions until you get to that point of having a green card. But I am thoroughly enjoying watching MAGA Republicans